The only system that we had was Swift system for the international payment. I had an opportunity to work with some of the best brains in Nepal. The check clearing was the first project that I had to work. We jointly worked with the central bank to have that RTGS placed in Nepal. A real-time retail payment system, RTP systems here for Nepal, which was implemented initially as a faster payment system called as an Connect IPS, planned to implement an RTGS system. Rest of the other systems are all homegrown system here in Nepal, some of them by our partners, jointly with the partners, and most of them through our own in-house team as well. 8 to 10,000 checks was what we used to process of around 8 billion Nepali rupee equivalent transaction every
Oh,
day. So
okay.
within once it went live, and today we process around 60 to 65,000 transactions per day, equivalent to around 40 to 50 billion Nepali rupee equivalent.
You were at IIT, right? How was the life at IIT?
First of all, thank you very much to be able to speak on myself and my past work that I've done. So basically, after the education, I joined, that's basically after engineering and after doing an MBA from IIT in India. So I got
Correct.
placed in Tata Consultancy Services. That's where I got an exposure into the banking technology. Prior to that, I had also worked as a lecturer in a university for the Bachelor of Engineering. I was teaching as well. So during the time in India, that's where I got the basics on technology, financial technology. Typically, I used to work with the banks, and the security trading related applications is what I used to develop and work with, implemented in some of the jurisdictions. And after that, I went to a bank in Bahrain, worked there as a banking system manager initially, and later promoted to the assistant vice president, where I used to work for large scale project implementation, migrations, including the core banking, trading platforms, risk management systems, reporting platforms is what I had worked at. And that's where I got exposed into the operations of different banking technology, and also the key focus was on a project management, managing large scale projects. And after having worked outside Nepal for almost 10, 11 years, it has already been an aspiration that I should come back to Nepal and settle here and work for Nepal on whatever learnings that I've had in terms of education or in terms of the work experience that I've had. And throughout that 10 years of time or 11 years of time, the banking technology is something that I've done. So in that time when the central bank in Nepal, the Nepal Bankers Association, which is a consortium association of all the commercial banks here in Nepal, they were planning to establish the National Clearing House here in Nepal, which was initially mandated or had an objective, initial objective to implement the check clearing system. Until that time, all the payment systems are all manual payment system. Even the checks are processed, cleared manually, transferring the checks from one bank to another bank in a manual process way. And the only system that we had was Swift system for the international payment, and even that
Yeah.
Swift was used for the domestic transactions as well, from one bank to another bank. Interbank transactions was also done through Swift. And second system that we had in a very initial stage was on the cards payment. So that's Visa related transactions, and there
Hmm.
were one domestic card scheme here in Nepal called as an SCT, which was also one of the promoter on the NCHL at that time. So that was the new avenue that came up here, and which excited me that I will be able to do something here for Nepal, for establishing for the first time a clearing house and the check clearing system. That excited me. And we just packed, the entire family packed and came back to Nepal for working for that. And the one of the fear factor, the risk that I had in terms of the professional career was, if it doesn't work well, so I'll have to pack it again and go outside. That may be the worst case that I may have to take, but which never happened. I had an opportunity to work with some of the best brains in Nepal, which were all CEOs of the bank. They were on the board. Top-notch central bankers were there on the board, with whom I had an opportunity to work with, and lots of stakeholders with whom I had to work, including the government. So the check clearing was the first project that I had to work upon, and there is a very small team which we built from scratch. The office was built, incorporation of the company, establishing and getting all the approvals. It's like more of an building up in a startup company. That's where I started my journey in 2011 March. Um, uh, uh, for working on the check clearing, and then onwards we worked on the multiple similar other projects in line with the objectives and policy direction of the central bank to establish multiple national payment systems, which included ACH system for bulk and batch-based non-real-time systems, which we call as an NCHL IPS, interbank payment system. Then we worked on the real-time retail payment system, RTP systems here for Nepal, which was implemented initially as a faster payment system called as an Connect IPS. Then we worked on the national payment interface, API-based platform. Then the central bank came up with a plan to implement an RTGS system. That's where we jointly work with the central bank to have that RTGS placed in Nepal, whereby the central component of the infrastructure is placed at central bank, whereas the rest of the other integrations, bank components, we developed and put that into the system. And one good thing is the initial, we had a very little resources here in Nepal with respect to the knowledge and know-how of the payment system. So the initial systems like check clearing or ACH system, we bought it out of self from outside, and we have that implemented. But after the learning that came with the working for next 4 or 5 years of time, we had our resources built up here on itself. And the next, after ACH, rest of the other systems are all homegrown system here in Nepal. Some of them by our partners, jointly with the partners, and many and most of them through our own in-house team as well. So we talk about the integrations for RTGS, real-time payment system, faster payment system, national payment interfaces, and even recently all the cross-border integration that we have done with India and some other jurisdictions. These are all in-house, ingrown systems. And right now, the primary focus right now is on the cross-border payment system. That is one of the largest project that we're doing. And the card network, Nepal Pay card, the domestic card scheme is something that we are working at. And even establishment of the national card switch is also one of the in progress project for us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what.
So I think, sir, we as countries, India and Nepal, we have something in common, that we have the homegrown at least payment systems in India, where we have NPCI, in India you have NCHL, right? So something we can both be proud of as countries, right? But before we go there, right, something interesting, I see that you were working in Taib Bank, Bahrain, and then went to become a CEO of NCHL, right? So how did that happen? Is there a story there?
Okay, that's something that after working in Thai Bank for almost 6 years, I was actually looking for going back as a final settlement. My daughter was just born in Bahrain and she was close to 1 year. So we
Okay.
thought that me and my wife, Julian, we wanted her to grow up with a family here in Nepal on itself rather than in Bahrain. So that's also one of the motivation for us to go back. And second, we tried to find out the way out, or then from a professional side as well. We were trying to find out multiple options or opportunities here in Nepal, but somehow I landed up discussing with the president of the Nepal Bankers Association here in Nepal. So that's where he actually helped me out and told me about this opportunity, which was a bit of a difficult decision to take because that's completely a new company. No
Yeah.
one knew basically whether that will fly or not. And second, almost at the middle of the career, as a professional career for myself, taking that decision was a tough one to take a call whether I should be working at or should be trying to find out a more stable job or work in some of the projects per se. But that's a bit of a risky decision that at that point of time, I would say. But looking back now, I guess that I believe is one of the best decisions that I and my family, my wife, must have taken.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, unless you take a path, right, you will not know where it will lead, right?
Yeah,
And I think
that's something
moving to
that
new,
unless because staying in a Bahrain, that's basically you don't have to pay the income tax, whatever you get, in terms of the income and
true,
the facilities that you get is very appreciable. But that's something is for working for 6 7 years in the same company, you remain in a very comfort zone. So
correct,
coming out of that comfort zone is always risky and difficult basically, but unless you come out of it you don't find what's waiting for us. So
correct.
that's the kind of a story that I can actually relate
Mhm.
with my moving out of the Bahrain and then coming back to Nepal and working for
Mhm.
NCHL.
True, true. We always want to go back to our roots, right? Maybe do something for our own country and have a comfort of our family and all relatives there, right? Uh, NCHL, when, like you said, right, it was a startup, government-backed startup, but still, it was a risk, right? So, have you been, or you had an idea that okay, I want to do a startup, or it was a calculated risk that you have taken, or it was like okay, I can build something out of this, and that's how you joined NCHL. What was the thought?
Startup in the sense and not in form of entrepreneur, self-funded entrepreneur, but yes, being in a startup company right from the base, that will give lots of opportunity to explore, one, and second, to establish yourself. It basically gives them lots of opportunities. So that's also one of the major motivation of the initiative, the motivation for me, one. And second is from a project perspective, one of the project that is actually led and promoted by the central bank and the bank's community on itself. Working with them is also one of the major attraction for me, even if it fails. So I would, if I give an 100% or 110% on this along with the team members, there's very less likelihood that it may fail. But the kind of environment Nepal is at that point of time, one, and second is almost zero payment systems in Nepal in 2010-11 in terms of the checks or other digital payments. It was not thought of also. So the amount of opportunity to grow was immense if we were able to roll out the first project. So that has helped to drive and move forward on that project. But yes, the amount of risk from a professional side was very high at that point of time, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was definitely a risk because even when in India, right, people the Bhim or UPI was launched, there was n number of people who were saying that in India digital will not work, right, because of the low income and people not having the technology or the internet and everything, right? But yes, like Nepal in India also it flew. Uh, Now you have spent a lot of your career in NCHL, right? Do you have a memory which you like to share, a challenge it was there, or a fond memory with your colleagues when starting up? Anything that you'd like to share?
Oh, okay. Right from the start, if I have to recall, I was the basically in his initial stage, NCSL, we hardly had 3 or 4 people. So we even have, when I joined here, we even have a guard of at an office. So we used to basically open and close the doors of the office by ourselves. So two, three, that's very fun memory. And top of that, on the inside, as you have mentioned, that there will always be the people who will be in initial stage, there were lots of resistance from multiple people. There were only few people who used to support and believe on the dreams or the vision of NCHL, what it carried forward. So there were lots of even the banks who were saying that the clearinghouse or the automated clearinghouse in Nepal, it will not work. So they were not exactly against, but they were not in favor of having an NCHL going ahead. So there are lots of frictions or resistances which we had to face. And jointly with the board and some of the members of the central bank, we had to defend those stakeholders. So that not exactly the fist fight, but yes, in terms of convincing them, and the initial stage was lots of challenges. Yet the fun learning from a learning perspective as well, and to have that NCHL rolled out by convincing those stakeholders was a real fun journey. for NCHL, and for me as a professional, from a professional and the personal level as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can understand. And I'm giving a lot of Indian examples because I'm from India. But I remember a movie. I'm not sure if you have seen Chandrayaan, right? There, when the project starts, they get an office where it's all dirty. No one is there. They had to clean everything, right?
Yeah.
Before they send first satellite to the Mars, right? So I think that's the
And by the
journey.
way, today when we have actually implemented and operating almost eight large scale systems here in Nepal, and national payment switch on the go, those people who were a bit of resistive or not very clear at that point, they are the largest brand ambassador for NCHL today. They speak of for NCHL and they support and by all means today. So that's one of the major achievement that we have done in last 13, 14 years, is what we believe the impact and the achievement as an institution as well.
True, true. I mean, as humans, we are resistant to change, right? And but after, I mean, of course, after the implementation, right, it would have been boon for banking industry itself, right? It would have been much simpler, lowered their cost, right? Improved the profitability, right? Is that something that happened with the banking system?
Oh yes, of course. When we're doing a manual check clearing, I'm talking about the first system on itself. So when we're doing the manual check clearing in Nepal, it used to be whole Nepal, hardly um, 8 to 10,000 checks was what we used to process, of around 8 billion Nepali rupee equivalent of transaction every
Oh,
day. So
okay.
within once it went live, and today we process around 60 to 65,000 transactions per day, equivalent to around 40 to 50 billion Nepali rupee equivalent of transaction. At that point of time, they used to say just for 5 to 8,000 checks transactions, we don't need systems. So manual process is sufficient to do it. So we don't need to invest on that. So the point that NCHL and the promoters at that point of time was, once we implement the systems, it will basically create a business out of that. So the number of transactions will grow, number of impact or on the business and the economy and on the bank side, it will basically increase. So having said that, if we were to stuck with the manual process, and having been processed 60 or 1 lakh transaction checks transaction only in a day, that would have been almost not possible. So that's where we started. But today, when we see the totality of all the systems that we are processing close to around 70 to 75 billion Nepali rupee equivalent of transaction every day through multiple systems that we are doing today, around 5 to 7 lakh transactions per day, the financial transactions per day, and impacting almost every bank. That's around 55 plus banks and financial institutions. Other than banks, the non-bank licensed entities like insurance, remittance, the government entities, capital market related stakeholders and their customers, which is around 2 to 2.5 crore equivalent of number of customers, or their instruments like the mobile banking or the cards are being processed through us. So starting from a very trying to just automate the manual check clearing, the core benefit basically is to increase the efficiency, the productivity increase only is the underlying benefit that they use to justify the check clearing implementation. To the innovative products and services that we support through mobile banking, cards, fast payment systems, or batch based large value transactions, batch based small value transaction, or a large value transactions, moving towards those systems is something that we have been able to achieve so far.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, one is that the banking industry that has impacted, right? But there is other side of it as well, right? Which is a consumer or a customer side, right? So because of this fast processing, digital processing, digital infrastructure, right? Even the customer's experience would have enhanced, right? Or their way of banking has changed. So what has happened there?
Uh, from checks to ACS to the faster payment system, today, if we talk to any of the customers, in terms of the payments, they want a real time. So immediate, instant is something that is an expectation of the customer. So if I've done a transaction now, I want that done and credited in my bank account or in wallet of a beneficiary immediately. So instant payment is something that is the expectation of the customers, and I believe that is going to be the near future in a in a short to mid term. That's going to be the expectation in terms of whether that's a movement of the fund or movement of the product and services also. So until when we used to have the check clearing manually, even within Kathmandu, one check clearing used to take T+2 or T+3. If it is an outstation check, we even have an experience. We have actually experienced that 3 weeks to 4 weeks of time is what the time used to take for check clearing. So today, even in checks, we have we are clearing it within 1 hour, 1.5 hour of time. So other than that, the mobile banking or the wallet related transactions, the faster payment that we are processing. So it has actually helped the banks to provide the services of a real-time payments to the customers. So the instant gratification is the ultimate expectation of the customers. I believe that it's not true not only in Nepal, but in the rest of the world. That's where
Yes.
the customer journey is moving towards.
Of course, of course. I remember when in the old days, right, we used to do the transaction and it used to reflect in 2, 3 hours or 4 hours, right? And those 2, 3 hours were, of very tense that, okay, has it gone through? Has it not? Is it stuck somewhere? It is not reached yet. What has happened, right? But yeah, with the digital system, that has become very easy. Today, if I had to send money to my mother, right? Living anywhere, right? I can just do it with one touch, right? And it has changed the experience like anything. Uh, but has it also gave rise to fintechs in NPCI, right? Because fintechs mostly they work on the digital infrastructure of banking and payment systems, right? So has it also given rise to the fintech industry in Nepal?
I would say yes. Initially, when the central bank actually came up with an idea of having this digital payments and digital banking related policy directions, it was more towards directed towards the banks, licensed banks and financial institutions. Later, it realized that only banks will not be able to drive this to the scale that intends to, and that's
Okay.
exactly when the policy direction of the central bank also changed, that it need to allow the non-bank entities as well, the fintechs here in Nepal. And when it came up with the licensing pattern, they identified itself as these entities as a payment service providers or the payment system operators. So these entities work in the specified space of payments or developing specific technology for either for customer onboarding or for merchant onboarding, providing a facilitation to the banks for processing of the payments. So these entities did help. So during the time of 2015, 16, when central bank came up with this policy direction to allow the non-banking entities, they help build the large scale infrastructure. NCHL is also one of them, who is also licensed as a PSO from the central bank. And these entities basically worked closely with the banks and financial institutions, collaborated with multiple entities, and then build up the infrastructure for helping the digital payments and the digital banks as well. So before the COVID time, these entities actually built a large scale infrastructures. And when COVID hit, because we had the infrastructure in place on the ground, almost from a banking perspective or the digital payments perspective, there were almost zero impact in terms, even when the banks were closed, even the markets were closed, because we had the infrastructure built for the end customers to initiate the payments or receive the payments. Banks had the multiple channels for the customers, or the merchants had the channels to receive the payments. The businesses were not impacted because of the banking services, because there were infrastructure built by the fintech entities. And now this is picking up from the perspective of even the non-licensed entities are also providing the third-party partnership with the banks or the entities like NCHL who are helping us and banks build necessary infrastructure, whether that's for payments, transaction banking, or even for the digital loan related infrastructures, or online account opening or online deposit based infrastructures. Fintechs are building infrastructures required for the banks and financial institutions and for PSPs and PSOs as well.
Yeah, no, COVID was definitely difficult time for all of us, right? Especially in banking, and thanks to digital infrastructure, right? Life would have been otherwise very, very difficult. Now, NCHL was a startup, but uh, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a government startup, right? So have you had challenges, right, when establishing a team or, the way of working, right? Because a startup needs a different culture, right? Very agile, fast, changing, right? Uh, Build quick, fail fast, right? Uh, right. So that type of culture, more agile culture. So how was it difficult? How was the experience there?
Okay, this is, I guess, NCHL was established, although it's an initiative of the banks and even the central bank, it was established more from a perspective. It's basically a role model here in Nepal, as a business case of a PPP model, so public-private partnership model. We had
Okay.
the central bank, we represent the government entity. We had a private and the government banks on one side, and when we started, we also have a private entity as well at a starting point. So it's a perfect model of a PPP model. That's how it was established. But what it was clear, the central bank was also clear that in many of the jurisdictions, these kinds of payment systems are actually run by the central banks as well, right? So in many of the cases, except at that point of time, we had the Lanka Clear in Sri Lanka, which was already established prior to us.
Mhm.
And in India, NPCI was in 2008-9 it was about to be established, almost at that stage. So the central bank was clear that if these systems are to be implemented and operated by the central bank, the kind of agility and the innovation that is actually required in a from a very free environment or the free culture perspective, it will be difficult for them. But one system can be implemented, but multiple systems that is actually required to build a national infrastructure will be difficult. That's the whole idea, that it wanted a separate independent entity to be established, and it actually runs the whole business, or the infrastructure is actually implemented and operated more from a sustainable model. So since the central bank was of the view that it has to be independent, although it is a company, or the concept was actually born from the central bank and the banks, it has to be an independent company, one. And the kind of infrastructure that is actually required for Nepal has to be well thought of, implemented in a sustainable model rather than from a subsidy from the central bank or from a government. It has to be a sustainable model. So that's where the whole game of freedom to the company was actually given. So we have on the board, the central bankers is also there, banks and financial institution representation is also there. So the equitable representation of the company is there, so they can actually drive their vision. But when it comes to the business, or when it comes to the operation, the freedom of sustainability from a long-term perspective, and having the infrastructure put in place what it is supposed to do, that freedom has always been there at NCHL. And that's also one of the key success factor, I believe, is. And today, when we see from an sustainability perspective, so initial investment that the central bank and the banks and financial institution, whatever they have done, we have ensured that the return that we have been able to get out of each system, we reinvest that into the second set of systems. So we have not called for any additional investment from the central bank or from anyone. So whatever we are generating as in revenue, or the cash flow is there from the company, we are reinvesting and reutilizing that for the next set of infrastructure. That's how we have moved on, and has been a pretty successful model for us here in Nepal.
Right. No, I think that's why NCHL is so successful because of the freedom, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible, right? But I think there is also other side of it, right? So you being the leader of a startup, right? Startup and team becomes your family, right? But then there is your another family, right? Your wife, kid, everyone, right? So how was their reaction? Because running a startup needs your 24 by 7 attention, right? Lot of work, attention, and so how was the personal journey at that time?
It's been 13 years plus now associated with the NCHL since I started in 2011. My family used to say that you stay and have their beds as well in the office. That's the kind of a joke that my wife and my even my mother says that. So it's sometimes difficult to balance that both the sides. But yes, they have been very, very supportive in terms of what the ultimate objective that NCHL has been carrying and my passion with in association with NCHL, what I want to achieve out of NCHL is something that they do understand and have been very, very supportive in terms of the things that I could best expect out of them. So it's always
Uh,
difficult because most of the time I have to be at the office for almost 10, 12 hours or 14 hours of time. Even today,
yeah,
after 13 years of time, not just me, but most of the senior management and even the mid management people at NCHL, they're equally dedicated. And they're not just run or after the core benefit that NCHL is giving, but the kind of the objective that the NCHL is carrying to establish a large-scale infrastructure, the persistence that on in terms of the effort that we have been keeping, that is what most of the team members here in NCHL is driven from. So that's also one of the benefits. I'm very happy, and I feel that I'm lucky basically to have such kind of a team at NCHL.
definitely, definitely, sir. I mean, it doesn't happen without the family support, right? What do they say now, right? After 14 years, right? Where they were complaining in the beginning, right? What do they say now?
So
What's your
from the
family's
other
thought?
stakeholder, external stakeholders perspective, as I've said earlier also, there are few stakeholders who were not very in favor of NCHL or having this company or the systems being established. Some of them are the best brand ambassadors of NCHL today. They say in favor and they support NCHL in almost every forum. So whether
Mhm.
that's a central banker or the bankers as well, is what I feel one of the largest achievement of an NCHL is.
No, when I said other entities, right, or other people, I mean your family, right? Where earlier they were complaining, right? You go and stay at the office only, right? What are their thoughts now after 14
No,
years
that's
of
more from a
NCHL
personal
success?
sense. If uh, I'm spending lots of time, almost 12, 14 hours in an office, that's a normal reaction that I would believe. That's not in terms of in a negative sense, but
No, no,
I
definitely
believe
not.
that that's the way of being engaged and being supporting. I would be expecting out of them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, definitely. And I'm sure they're proud of what you made NCHL today, right? Entire Nepal's payments and banking system is based on it now, right? So NCHL has come a long way, right? How does the future of payments in or banking in Nepal looks like, right? With the new technology coming in, AI coming in, right? Automation is there, right? So how does the future look like?
So when we look at it from a current status perspective, I believe that from an infrastructure, core infrastructure perspective, we're well placed now. So whatever the core infrastructure actually required. for the entire portfolio of very micro payment to the large value payment, different instrument types or the issuing instrument types, or any from an issuing side from an acquiring side, we have that infrastructures now. So it's basically matter of scaling up those infrastructure to handle a large volume of transaction. But that's from an infrastructure side perspective. But from where when we look at it from the utility or the acceptability or the use case perspective, how are we going to exploit this existing infrastructure for the betterment of the ecosystem, for the betterment of the customers or the merchants per se, or for the banks also. So it's basically the number of use cases and the scaling up of the ecosystem is what we need to work upon. And when we do that, there are will be requirement from a use case that we have very specific technologies that we use, because at the end of the day, going forward, we feel that the payments only, or a very bare minimum of payments, it's going to be a basic service going forward. So nobody's going to do a payment for the sake of payment. So there has to be a value addition, or the product and services, or the embedded finance, or the embedded banking, or the embedded services that will remain associated with the customer, but the underlying infrastructure, the payments will be embedded or linked with such services. So which will be part and parcel of the overall services or the experience that the customer will see or the businesses will see. So
Yeah.
that's where the integration of the core infrastructure with the services is where we are moving towards. And having said that, specific technologies like AI or the automation will be required. One, for the product innovations, and second, from the efficiency perspective or the productivity perspective, and third, from the risk management, whereby we will be requiring lots of technology backed controls or the mitigating factors that will be required to secure the infrastructure, the services that we will be working towards. So the cybersecurity or the risk management based out of AI is something that will be very, very important for Nepal. And that's also one of the area that we are also working at. And from the banks or the service provider perspective, the automation for improving the efficiency and the productivity for the layman work or the day-to-day work, or for some kind of the processing automation, that will also be required from the banks and service providers perspective as well. That's where we see lots of opportunity and the industry or the ecosystem moving towards.
Right, right, true, sir. And with this new technologies, right, providing services to a customer, personalization, right, that is also on the emerge, and micro lending, right. So in India, micro lending has grown a lot because of the fintechs, right? Is it the same case in Nepal, where these startups, right, they do like micro lending, like maybe 50,000 to 2 lakh rupees or 3 lakh rupees, right? Quickly in your account, right? Yeah. Is that something that is happening?
So that also depends on how the regulator has actually envisioned and allowed such services. So unlike in India, in Nepal, the micro lending perspective, there has been some sort of regulation from the central bank which allows to initiate and disperse the micro lending by non-bank entities, but the entire underwriting of those loan portfolio micro lending has to be with the banks and financial institutions. So it's not completely opened up, but processing part of it, or tying it up with the banks and then helping the customers to originate or process the micro lending, and then disbursement side of the micro lending is what is allowed for the some of the licensed fintech players. Otherwise, the underwriting is not yet allowed. But
Okay.
moving forward, the micro lending or complete digital lending kind of a thing is something that we look forward for, because the central bank is also looking at having a digital bank established. The licensing are getting opened up for the digital banking as well. So that's will require the bank, the central bank, to open up a license for or allow the regulation for the complete end-to-end micro lending and even the micro deposits as well.
Right, right, right. And sir, with the rise of new technology, right, especially generative AI, right, for the text, image, what are your personal thoughts on how, especially generative AI as a technology, right, how it is going to impact?
So it has not, from a generative AI perspective, it has not, we've not seen much of the product per se, but there has been initiatives by the fintechs and some of the banks on the digital loan perspective. So basically, identification and predictive algorithms, the customers profiling or scoring is actually done, and then quantifying or identifying the amount of repayment capacity of such customers, and those kinds, and based on that the small amount loan disbursements are being done and has already been started, number one. And on from the risk side also, there are entities, even NCHL, we are actually implementing on the risk and fraud management system, the AI based profiling of the customers or the transaction profiling. Based on that, we are implementing a fraud and risk, large scale fraud and risk management systems, an AI based fraud and risk management system. But from the generative AI or a very specialized product and services, I guess we still have to see the clarity on the regulation part, one, unless we have a very specific regulation, and in fact the law with respect to how we are going to govern the data, how we are going to share those data, utilize those data. I guess we will have to wait for some time to use to see the use cases specific to those generative AI. Otherwise, it
Correct.
may be a little bit difficult for the entities, or at least the regulated entities, for getting into the details of such technology.
True, true. Yeah, I mean, especially banking industry or payment industry has to be very cautious because this is a dragon we don't want to get out of hands, right?
Right.
Generative AI can go out of hands. Even now, ChatGPT, if you ask something, right, it gives you the facts. If you ask a source, it says, "Oh, I don't have a source of it," right? So sometimes it's hallucinates. After said that, right? There are other people in Nepal, right, who are aspiring to be what you have become today in the Nepal's banking and financial industry, right? Want to grow young professionals, right? What advice would you like to give it to them?
So, in terms of the institution perspective,
Individual perspective.
okay, from an individual perspective, I believe that Nepal, although there are lots of inefficiencies in terms of the process, or the, from when we see at the government or even from the corporate institutions as well, inefficiencies are there, but that's exactly where lots of opportunities for improvement lies. So I, for the professionals or the institutions who want to work here in Nepal, so there are lots of business that can be built out of the inefficiencies that we have. One, and second is, we don't have the piggyback, or we don't have a history whereby we have to carry those stuffs in when we are talking about the technology. So it's a complete open field opportunity whereby we can have the best breed of technology, have that implemented here in Nepal, try and test it. So you can actually build a global products out of it. At least the Nepal can be the first uh, client or first market to try it out with. It's a very small market though, but that can be a benchmark for moving as a global product as well. So that's second. And third is from an individual perspective also, if you are aspiring to do new things, the market here in Nepal is very, very receptive. So the customers, this very young crowd, from a demographic perspective, also is we are very young. So lots of new products and the services, whatever comes into the market, it basically accepts it very fast. Yes, if it doesn't work, it rejects it very fast as well. But the kind of positive outcome that is possible out of this market is, I believe that it's very, very high. And the young people who wants to work in this field, typically in the fintech or payments, digital banking, or the digital deposits or the credit perspective or very specific technology of the AI. There are lots of opportunities that you can actually explore at. And from a regulatory perspective, also there are gray areas whereby it's a little bit difficult to actually translate. But from a regulatory perspective, they are very, very supportive in terms of even if there are gray areas, they are allowing people or the institution to work on these new upcoming technologies. So there from a support from a policy direction also, I see lots of opportunity for the young people who want to work here in Nepal in this sector.
No, definitely, sir. Some see as a challenge, some see challenges and opportunities, right? And grow on it, right? So one last question, and I have to ask this, right? You were at IIT, right? How was the life at IIT?
It's very hectic. In fact, that's it for it was a new experience for me. That's the first time that I stayed at the hostel in IIT Roorkee, and lots of Indian friends there. We were 4 or 5 Nepali who went there, so it was completely new environment for me. From a very climatic environment as well. Staying in Kathmandu at a temperature of 22, 27, 28, maybe in the summer it's hardly
Yeah.
30, 32 degree, and going to Roorkee at the degree of
Oh,
40, 42 degree. It was a tough time to stay,
true.
but well, staying in a hostel, living with lots of well-minded and similar-minded friends there from India and from other jurisdictions as well. It was lots of experience for me, and one of the best experience that I would say that I've learned from. And the IIT Roorkee having an history of more than 150 years in engineering and lately in other fields as well. It was a good experience for me academically, and have actually helped build my professional career from there on. So it's a very good experience for me.
How was the life at hostel? Late night Maggies or how
Same,
it?
yeah. That's that's the best part of it. You don't remember the classes and everything, but you do remember the late night parties, but the
True.
bumps and
True, true. Yeah, I mean, money was not something that you wish, right? But those late nice birthday cakes and bumps, right? And staying up for the studies, right?
right.
Going out with friends. That's something we wish for now. Right. Okay. I think that's it, sir. It was a very insightful and interesting discussion, right? Your journey is something very inspiring at NCHL and how you have built it from scratch, right? Thank you so much for giving us time, right? I hope to see you again in one of podcast like this, right? Where we can talk on some specific topic, right? And that's it, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah,
Thank you, sir. Have a good
thank you.
day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Thank you.
you. Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.